So, hi everyone. My name is Janvi, and I was the summer intern last year, so summer of 2019. And just in 3 months of working at interning at New England Hospice, I learned so much about hospice and the benefits that it can provide to patients. So, I put together this short presentation about, the a little bit of the ins and outs of a hospice, so that you can learn more about it. So this slide is just kind of debriefing a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So first, I'm going to talk about what hospice is all about, then the difference between hospice and palliative care, which includes some of the myths about hospice. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what the benefits are that hospice can provide. And then, of course, talk a little bit about New England Hospice and the New England Hospice team. So before we get started on the meat of the presentation, I found this quote that I wanted to share. So this says that we cannot change the outcome, but we can affect the journey by Anne Richardson. And I think this really embodies what hospice is all about because individuals on hospice care are at the end of their life. But what hospice can do is they can make the transition both emotionally and spiritually much better. Yeah. So to know what something is really about, it's important to understand the history. So, the idea of hospice and palliative care is actually not that old. So, in 1963, Dr. Saunders introduced the idea of palliative care rather than treatments for the purpose of a cure. So, that just means that instead of treating patients in the hopes that they would get better and that they would be cured, you treat patients as providing comfort to them and providing a good transition to the end of their life. Then in 1986, there was a big step where the Medicare hospice benefit was enacted, and this allowed hospice to be covered by Medicare, and therefore it had a broader reach. And then, of course, to mention New England Hospice, in 2003, New England Hospice opened its doors to provide care, comfort, and dignity to hospice patients all across Massachusetts. Okay, so to talk a little bit about the difference between hospice and palliative care, palliative care is defined as symptom management of a life-threatening illness, while also symptom management, provides provides comfort care at the end of one's life. So palliative care is a kind of umbrella term which encompasses hospice care. So hospice care is a type of palliative care. On this slide, I found a handy figure that addresses a bunch of myths about hospice. So we can go through them. The first one is that it's too expensive and not covered by insurance. And there isn't much to discuss about this, except for the fact that most insurance plans do cover hospice, and hospice care can be covered under the Medicaid Hospice Act. Next is that you wouldn't be able to keep your original doctor who you've been seeing for a long time, and that is also untrue because hospice care is a type of care that's provided in your home, whether that be an independent living situation, a retirement home, a nursing home, whatever it may be, and therefore you can choose your doctor, and your doctor can come with you onto whatever hospice services you decide to enroll in. Another myth that kind of goes around is that once you enroll in hospice, you can't leave. And patients do go in and out of hospice depending on their health outlook. So that means if a patient comes onto the hospice services and you find that their symptoms are getting better with the individualized attention and treatment, then they can graduate from hospice and they can come back at a later time if needed. Also, no one else decide what happens with your loved ones. Your family and you as the if you're the healthcare provider, you're in total control and empowered to decide care, whether that be certain treatments that the individual would receive, certain care, you're in complete control of that. Hospice is also not giving up care. It just ensures a smooth transition emotionally, spiritually, and financially for everyone. So I know a lot of the time it can be viewed as giving up hope, but it's important to remind yourself that that's not the case. And lastly, I think the biggest misconception is that hospice is for the very last days of your life. And I think that's a misconception I also had before I interned at New England Hospice. But really, to gain the full benefits of hospice, you need at least a few months in hospice care. Okay. So I've kind of summarized a couple benefits of hospice on this slide. So the first thing is that hospice is an added layer of attention. So if your loved one lives in a retirement home or a nursing home, they have their facility staff. And a hospice does not work for the facility, but they have a contract with each facility. And then we can come in and provide care. So we can advocate for the patients and the families, but we're not in control of certain of the facility aspects. So overall, a hospice is really just an additional layer of attention onto your loved one, and that can only provide benefits. The second, as I mentioned before, is it's personalized care in your home, whether that be an independent family home, whether that be a retirement home, a nursing home. Hospice can come in and provide care in that situation. Lastly, hospice can also provide emotional support, which the facility may or may not be able to be equipped to do. So there are several members on the hospice team that can provide this type of service. And I'm going to go into that on the next slide. So talking about New England Hospice, here on the right, we have a bunch of pictures of different New England Hospice teams. So that could be different locations, different um, facilities. So, a broad overview of who is usually on the team is the project manager, the social worker, the chaplain, the hospice aide. There sometimes is a companion and then an on-call nurse. So, to start with the nurses, so our nurses will provide assessments, consistently check in with the facility nursing staff, make medications and all comfort recommendations. So, an example of this would be deciding when an air mattress or a Broda chair is appropriate. So there's a daytime nurse whose position title is project manager, and then there's an after hours nurse who's titled the on-call RN. Next, you have the social workers, and I mentioned earlier that a big benefit of hospice is emotional support, and I think a lot of that comes from the social workers. So the social workers can provide psychosocial assessments, advocate and provide education to both the patient and the patient's families, and they can also help with funeral arrangements when needed. Next, we have the chaplains. All of them are non-denominational and they can provide spiritual support, companionship, and address any spiritual needs that the patient or the family may have. Lastly, on this list, we have the companions. Oh, I apologize. We also have the hospice aides. So the hospice aides provide at least an additional hour of care 3 to 5 times a week. They can bathe, dress, provide companionship, feed. So this all just depends on what the needs of the patients are when the aide goes into the room. So for example, if the aide goes into the room and they find that the patient is in need of companionship, then they can provide companionship. If they find that the patient is um, in need of a bath, then they can, give the patient a bath, whatever they may need. And then lastly, we have the companion who can just provide an additional layer of kind of just support to the patient, whether that be through talking to them, listening to music with them, drawing with them, whatever the patient's interests lie in. So this is the end of my presentation. I have the office address here and the phone number to reach out to if you have any questions or concerns.